I don't want to say that it felt like an abandoned warehouse, no, but when Celia and I arrived at the Arsenale's Corderer, the cavernous hall felt desolate and forgotten. Our voices echoed off of the high wooden ceilings. Its tan brick walls and columns couldn't breathe beneath a shroud of chalky dust. Celia, however, did not mind the gloom, or did not notice it. She began pointing at nothing really, but she imagined how, in one spot or another, hundreds of years earlier, Venice's navy had made ship ropes and cables that were thicker than tree trunks, all of them stretching the length of the 1,000-foot-long building itself. Celia ran down the immense corridor, saying, "Imagine them!" And she grew small on the far, far end of the room. 500 years ago, she shouted. Italians making big-ass rope! She sprinted back toward me, obviously excited to show her art at the Venice Biennale for her first time, in 1993. It was my first time at the biennial as well, but no, not as the artist. I'd only assist her in installing her work. As the day went on and more artists arrived, our voices stopped echoing off of the walls, and the Corderer became something completely different, alive, for the Biennale Special Exhibition Apeto 93. This secondary exhibition intended to show the world what was newer than new in the arts, where young artists were frantically taking us, and most importantly to Celia, it was where she was asked to present Beach Day. After a week, the Corderer was filled with television monitors that blinked fuzzy video installations. Graffiti art hung everywhere. Damien Hirst's halved cows solemnly stood in their formaldehyde aquariums. Janine Antoni set up several busts of herself made of chocolate. A Czech teenage girl couldn't restrain herself and promptly ate the noses. There was Yukinori Yanagi's The World Flag Ant Farm, where the ants slowly destroyed the world's flags. The ants began dying before the show even debuted. Andre Serrano showed photographs of corpses. Matthew Barney's 3 television screens played Drawing Restraint 7, where satyrs awkwardly chased their own tails or rode in and out of Manhattan in limousines. Celia and I watched Gabriel Orozco use half of his space for nothing more than an empty shoebox. Orozco's curator stood guard over the flimsy little cardboard for an entire day, fighting off a mob of angry artists who couldn't believe so much space was occupied by a little piece of cardboard. I thought that Charles Ray might slug him across the jaw. I loved Orozco's little shoebox, the statement it made in this gargantuan room that was just filled with gargantuan egos, but I must say, I wanted to slug the curator as well after trying to install Celia's film. Videos and films normally receive their own darkened space, a place to appreciate what unfolded on screen, away from the chaos that can be a biennial. But the curators of Aperto 93 wanted to open the entire floor, creating an archipelago of art. I didn't want to hear that word, archipelago, ever again after trying to present Celia's film out in the open. Initially, Celia had envisioned a grand piece for the Biennale's U.S. pavilion, a coveted space where a single artist is chosen to represent the country. She had submitted plans to fill an entire wall of the pavilion with a new film. But in between the projector and the screen, she'd erect 5 cubes of various sizes, and each of these white boxes held their own projectors. From the far end of the room, you could view the main projection displayed on the screen and the fronts of the cubes together. But as the viewer moved closer to the screen and past the boxes, they'd see that the black gaps made by these barriers were actually filled by smaller projections emitted from the cubes, creating a different scene for the viewer to observe on the main wall. the smaller projections would seamlessly blend in with the larger picture. It was film, sculptural, interactive, and, I believe, worthy of the U.S. pavilion. But the U.S., no. It did not choose Celia to represent the country. She was only 28 years old, far younger than most U.S. representatives in the past. More damning, however, most likely, was that even 2 years after the NEA controversies, many people were not certain of whether Celia was an artist or merely a provocateur. And this was still a time when many in the art world did not believe you could be both. She was eager to be taken seriously, to leave these supposedly unholy insurrections behind. She had tried with her initial biennale proposal, but no, I don't believe the selection committee took her as seriously as she deserved. Still, Celia and I were happy that she was asked to scale down her original proposal for Aperto 93. That is, until we actually arrived to install it. She apparently hadn't scaled it down enough. At least it wasn't enough for Erkenbold Fuchs, whose installations were given placement next to her. We arrived first, and we were not told just how close Fuchs would be to us. There truly was no barrier in between us, and besides, we never assumed he'd use every centimeter lining our own space, and more. Celia and I worked with the boxes we'd crafted to hide the projectors, moving them back farther and farther from the screen. We needed one projector to fill all the wall space we were given, and it needed to align perfectly with the other projectors inside the white boxes that we had arranged in between. The film, and Celia considered it one film despite being made of 3 separate films, at first appeared to be an innocuous beach scene. The big screen was filled by a projector that sat in a very tall, skinny box. The other projectors were housed in floor-level boxes. If you watched the largest projection, it looked like nothing more than a beach scene on Long Island. Sometimes a woman would point at something, a child, a sandcastle, and other people on the beach would look too, maybe laugh. However, if a viewer walked behind the small boxes, they'd find what Celia had hidden all along. A couple copulating, a woman digging herself into a hole that continuously filled with tide water. But in order for this anamorphic illusion to work, we needed the space we had been granted. We noticed Erkenbold Fuchs piling sandbag upon sandbag on the perimeter of his space next to ours. We noticed that this perimeter came directly for our tallest projector. We at first brushed him off, thinking, well, maybe this is just part of this archipelago that the curators want us to abide by. But then Fuchs walked up to me, extending his hand. He introduced himself, smiling, and he asked me about my film. Many questions before I could even answer him, and I had to tell him no. It wasn't my film, and he seemed very confused by this. It's my film, Celia said. And Fuchs at first appeared surprised, looking her up and down, checking her out in more ways than one. He said, sorry, perhaps realizing he made a faux pas, or at least feigning that he had. And then it was as if I'd never stood there in the first place. Something I needed to tolerate more and more over the years as her assistant. He asked Celia nicely, I believed, I'm really sorry, but would you two mind moving the projector a couple feet forward? I assume you are using feet. We apologized as well, but said we could not. We'd pre-planned every bit of space back home in New York for the clearest, optimal experience for the viewer. He said, maybe you were using inches in the US and not centimeters, though we did not know if he was sarcastic. We said no, we've measured everything precisely. He said, maybe you can just use TVs and VCRs like everyone else here is doing. Again, we didn't know if he was joking or actually asking Celia to completely change her medium. No, Celia said. We're not using VCRs. And who are you again? She obviously knew who he was. She just wanted him to feel small and inconsequential. And this riled the man up, as if he'd never been talked to in such a way. He said he was going straight to the top to take this up with the biennale's director, Achille Bonito Oliva. Celia and I laughed to each other as Fuchs huffed away fuming, though it still made us nervous to see his sandbag wall slowly encroaching upon our projector's box. When we finished our work, Fuchs still hadn't returned, though the sandbags remained. So we decided to take individual breaks, allowing one of us to keep guard until we knew more, if the director might really show. Then Celia's gallerist Patrick rushed in, telling her how she needed to attend a dinner with him and several other blue-chip gallery owners. They all needed to meet this woman who already caused such a stir across America, with barely a solo show to her name. Celia was desperate to join them, but only because she hadn't eaten all day. She couldn't afford to, time or money-wise. Patrick was very bad at giving her any sort of per diem, unlike how he was with many of his other artists we'd heard. She'd go at once, but she did emphasize how she needed to return to the Corderer very soon in order to allow me to eat dinner as well. What do you think is going to happen? Patrick asked her. Always her and never me. I don't think Patrick even knew my name, even though we'd met a dozen times by then. He usually called me Vincent instead of my given name, Vicente. Celia told me she'd return in just 30 minutes. After an hour had passed, I felt terribly hungry and I needed to use the restroom. I looked down at the sandbags. Nothing had moved in hours, which told me that Fuchs could return at any moment. When I felt a pinch of urine spreading in my underwear, I awkwardly ran-hobbled out of the Corderer, twisting my head left and right, unable to find a restroom, so I resorted to frantically unzipping my pants at the edge of the Venice Canal. I peed forcefully into the polluted water 4 feet beneath my shoes. It was a long piss, both time-wise and lengthwise. The relief nearly made me collapse into the water. The pigeons watched me regain my footing and zip my pants. I remembered my hunger and ran to find something to eat, but there was no fast food in Venice. When I finally found any restaurant at all, a place much too formal for my paint-stained coveralls, I tried explaining to the waitress that I needed everything put into a bag, and she frowned at me, saying something about me being a typical American, but I'm not an American, not exactly. I was born in Medellin. Whatever, I ran back to the Corderer with my ridiculous bag of pasta that was tossed in without its own container. The bottom of the bag was greasy with olive oil. When I ran into the Corderer, I looked up and noticed that our tall projector box wobbled back and forth. I didn't know how this could be. We'd designed it so that even if a viewer bumped into it, it almost certainly wouldn't fall down. And then I looked down and saw Erkenbold Fuchs slowly rocking the box back and forth, trying to shift it away from the path of his horrible wall. I sprinted toward him, yelling, "What the fuck are you doing?" Not knowing what to do, not thinking rationally at all, I smacked him over the head with my soggy bag of noodles. The pasta exploded all over his face, and he appeared stunned but unhurt, and then the box tipped over. First slowly, and then quickly. Right on top of me. I put up my hands as if catching an infant thrown from a second-floor fire. The projector box landed in my hands, but it awkwardly seesawed over my head as if I was the hinge. I slowed it down, but I couldn't stop it from crashing onto the floor behind me. The projector was screwed in inside of the box, but it still made a terrible noise. I heard the film unspooling inside. I was left holding the box, unsure if I should move. Fuchs wiped noodles and olive oil off of his ugly face. Celia and Patrick walked in with their dinner companions. There was confusion from everyone, except Celia, who looked incredibly angry, somehow knowing exactly what had happened. The biennale's director did get involved. Erkenbold Fuchs was reprimanded, though that didn't mean much more than Fuchs being checked in on by some lowly assistant once or twice before the biennale's opening. Celia and I, on the other hand, worked for many hours trying to place everything where it belonged, doing yet more tests to assure ourselves that the film wasn't damaged. We slept in very late the next day. Celia came to my room at 2 p.m. saying she was already tired of the biennale. She was tired of the egos. She was tired of the art by artists she only marginally liked. She hated meeting with these dealers the night before. To them, every artist could be distilled into a dollar amount. To get away from all this, she wanted to do some sightseeing, more than just the Grand Canal and the Piazza San Marco. So we boarded a boat. Not a gondola, no, though I secretly wish that we did. I think Celia also secretly wanted to ride in a gondola, with a gondolier, perhaps a gondolier serenading us. But we had joked for so long about how only honeymooners from Cincinnati did such things that we convinced ourselves that we were too cool to ride in the gondolas. Instead, Celia dug through her pocket to find the very few lira she still had and gave them to a man in a stand in front of a large boat. The vessel had maybe 50 seats on it. It was long and low, reminding Celia of a trailer in a trailer park. We did not know where the boat might take us. The man who sold us a ticket did not answer when we asked. Celia said, "Whatever, I just need to get off of this island for a while." So we boarded and found seats next to the starboard gunwale. The vessel disembarked and we set sail to do some sightseeing. We took in the centuries-old buildings that jutted out from the water like small islands rising from volcanic earth. We smelled the sea salt. We listened to the water splash against the hull. We felt the wind in our hair. We watched wooden speedboats lunge ahead of us. We felt liberated from the terrible night we'd had. Or I did. Celia kept turning back to where we launched from, not far from the bell tower that stands over Piazza San Marco. She said, "The Campanile is getting pretty far away." "So it is," I said. For the first time ever, I detected a real note of concern in Celia's voice. But I passed it off. We were on a pleasure cruise. We remained relatively near the shore throughout the beginning of our voyage. We did not know where we were going, and it did not matter. We were in high spirits. The vessel continued onward, past the wooden pylons marking the route like a road. We lugged behind the seagulls that flew faster than the boat's motors could push us. But Celia said, "Maybe we shouldn't have left." I turned to her, and she said, "In case anything comes up." I told her, "Let Patrick deal with it." But this only made her say, "So you do think something might come up?" "That's not what I meant." "But it's possible," she said. "You know it." "Anything is possible," I said, "which is why we should just enjoy this cruise. Look over there, it's like a fairy tale." We came upon an island, though we didn't know which one. All of the buildings were painted in bright colors, vibrant oranges, yellows, magentas, purples, greens. It appeared to be the happiest place on earth. And luckily for us, we were about to make land there. "Let's get off," I said. "I'd like to explore." But she said, "We should stay on the boat. I think we're turning back now. I'd like to go back." But as we pulled away from the dock and left those magnificent buildings behind, it was clear that we weren't going back. The vessel launched in the same direction as before. That is, farther away from where we came. Not only that, but we headed straight for another dock across the harbor. The captain said something over the intercom, but my Italian was so pathetic that I had no idea if he said a place's name or what he'd had for lunch. I turned to Celia. "If you're concerned," I said, "maybe we should get off here and wait for another boat to bring us back." And she insisted. "I think this is going back." "But how do you know?" I asked. And she said, "It needs to go back. I don't know how to ask for a new ticket back." But when we left that little port, we certainly weren't turning back. We rounded an island and suddenly found ourselves in open water. Land appeared to be miles away in any direction. And she said, "This fucking boat is taking us to Croatia." And she held her chin over the railing, as if that might give her a better view of the country. We were so far out that I might have been a little worried as well. I asked, "We're in the middle of the Adriatic Sea, aren't we?" I elbowed the man next to me, saying, "Adriatic?" and pointed out to the water, but he merely glared at me as if I was an imbecile. I told Celia they must use a different word for Adriatic. "Fucking hell," she said. "Erkenbold Fuchs is going to smash my projectors while I'm lost in the fucking Adriatic Sea." I said, "We can't be lost. Someone on here must know where we're going." By this point, the vessel had almost entirely emptied at our last two ports. We didn't pick anyone up, and Celia said, "I'd jump out, but I don't even know which way to swim." "Don't jump out," I said, because part of me knew she might. Instead, she unsteadily walked up to the captain's room and banged on the door. She banged again, and the door opened to a very young man, a boy almost, looking at her wide-eyed. And Celia asked, "Are we going to Croatia?" He did not understand her. Over the revving engines, she yelled, "I need to go back to the biennale!" Something like recognition lit up his face. He said a few words to Celia. She nodded as if she understood, and he shut the door. I asked, "So what did he say?" And she said, "I have no idea. I couldn't hear anything over the engines, and it was all in Italian." I noticed that we heaved closer to land, though I had no idea which land. I truly expected it to be Croatia. But as we sped closer, it appeared to be filled with the same Italian architecture that we'd seen all day. We pulled up to another dock. We didn't drop anyone off, but we picked up a few people. Celia was nervously tapping her foot so hard that her knee bounced. And then I heard somebody in this new group speaking Spanish. I couldn't believe it, even though I'd heard others like Orozco speaking Spanish all week. I couldn't believe it because I truly did feel as if we were lost. I lunged at this new family on board, nearly knocking the patriarch overboard by accident. And I learned that they were from outside of Madrid. Not only did they explain where we were going, they unfolded a map and pointed to exactly where we bobbed along the water at that moment. A map that Celia and I could have certainly picked up at the same kiosk where we'd bought our tickets. I didn't have the heart to tell Celia that we just completed a large circle around the islands of the Venetian lagoon. We never sailed more than a few miles away from the biennale. And we were then floating back on the same route that we'd taken, a very long route to and from Murano, which is within swimming distance of Venice itself. Celia probably could have jumped off the boat and swam back if she'd gone through with it. But what I told Celia, and what she's told many others over the years, is that she was lost in the Adriatic Sea, and we were most likely in Croatian waters, during the Bosnian War no less. Sometimes when she tells it, the boat sinks. But always, always in every telling, she says I'm the one who saves her. Which, well, it surprises me how that still makes me smile.